One of the things I love about director journeyman John A Russo, but also find a little strange and off-putting, is his cocksureness as a filmmaker when he is being interviewed about his work. For example, in an online interview, Russo was talking about the independent funding of Night of the Living Dead and made a very bold claim. Yeah, we did it all ourselves. Sam Raimi and Spike Lee, they all learned from us. I realised this claim might very well be true, as Night of the Living Dead was truly a groundbreaking movie in its production. But it was the way that Russo said it that made me think, who is this guy? And who does he think he is? It was this comment that made me want to go back and re-evaluate Russo's work, as he is obviously very proud of the work he has done in film. In the past, I remembered liking some of his work as a screenwriter too, so I thought I'd give his work a re-evaluation.
I know we're in here now.
Russo earned his chops, and will forever be known to horror fans and film buffs as the man who co-scripted the truly independent, classic horror film Night of the Living Dead. Russo not only co-scripted, but helped to produce, and also starred in the film. History has taught us, in the many documentaries and research works about Night of the Living Dead, that George A. Romero could never have made his genre-defining classic without his die-hard crew of friends from his production company Image 10, including Bill Heinzman, Russell Streiner, Marlon Eastman, Carl Hardman and John Russo, to name a few. And Romero has said that the film was only made possible because of the love and support of the local Pittsburgh community. Over the years, Romero's movies became like old friends to me, and seeing the giant man with his gentle smile and great sense of humour in interviews, which I've gone back to my whole life, make it very easy to see why people would love him and want to help him realise his dreams, as he seemed like such a great guy. After the release of Night of the Living Dead, George A. Romero and John A. Russo had a falling out, and George took the rights to the Of the Dead part of the title and made his famous sequels. John Russo took the rights to the Living Dead part of the title and wrote his sequel novel, Return of the Living Dead, which takes place 10 years after the events of the original film. The novel was later made into a great punk zombie fest with a screenplay by Dan O'Bannon of Dark Star and Alien fame, but had very little similar in story or tone to Russo's novel. A fun fact from Russo in conversation is that Return of the Living Dead was originally set to be directed by Russo on $1 million budget, produced by no other than Frank Sinatra. But because of a tragedy in the singer's life, he pulled out of backing the film, and Russo's involvement went by the wayside. Russo has said that after Night of the Living Dead, the Pittsburgh-based filmmakers, including George A. Romero and himself, weren't really popular with producers, and that he and George, working alone now as they had fallen out, had to make their next few films for minuscule budgets. Russo commented that, "When we made Night of the Living Dead, it was like, oh, it's a fluke, made by these Pittsburgh guys, and there was no real climate for that. And it wasn't like today with digital production. You couldn't make a movie back then unless you spent $70,000 or $80,000. George and I had to make our next several movies for crappy budgets." Russo seems to talk about this time as if he and Romero were in the same league as filmmakers. But it seems apparent, as George went on, over time, to be a success, and that Russo always remained strictly in the B-movie genre, that what they did with those budgets shows the difference between the success and creativity of the two filmmakers. Russo made a softcore movie called The Booby Hatch in 1976 for his first film as director, and the film is very clearly low budget, but manages to be an entertaining sex romp. Whereas Romero by this time had made films like Jack's Wife, Martin, The Crazies, and the interesting drama which Russo helped to produce there's always vanilla. Vanilla is thought of as the lesser entertaining of Romero's films, but I always liked its shy coming-of-age story and compare it to a very low-budget, almost Fellini-esque version of the Mike Nichols film The Graduate.
You just can't pick a girl up off the street and tell her her father's a bag of hot air and that she has a fat ass. I want an apology.
These movies Romero made all seem a lot more ambitious than anything Russo attempted up until the early 80s. So I wondered why Russo was even putting himself in the same camp as Romero.
Close the door.
During this time, Russo did successfully become a pulp horror novelist, cashing in on the fame of Night of the Living Dead, writing a novel based on the film in 1974. He went on to write some 20 fiction books, as well as a few non-fiction books on filmmaking, most notably Scare Tactics from 1992. Scare Tactics is famous, as Hollywood filmmaker Quentin Tarantino has said that, "This book got me through my first film." High praise for Russo indeed. Another fact that made me question, am I being too hard on this guy? Is he really the maestro and king of independent horror filmmaking that he claims himself to be? It was the early 1980s that saw the production of Russo's Chainsaw Massacre-like backwoods family horror film Midnight, based upon Russo's best-selling novel of the same name, written in 1978. Midnight seemed to me like Russo's best attempt at directing a feature film, and after his Dead films, is his most highly regarded and most available horror. So it was Midnight that I chose to look at for the sake of this short film. After reading the novel of Midnight, and learning more about Russo as a filmmaker from his filmmaking seminar, filmed for Market Square Productions in 1993, I began to become a lot more impressed with Russo as an ideas man and a filmmaking force of nature.
The scene you just saw was filmed right here at our film studio in downtown Pittsburgh. All the things the so-called witches do in Midnight, their evil prayers, their rituals, and so on, were based on painstaking research. These are just a few of my books on ghouls, vampires, werewolves, all kinds of monsters, including that most dangerous of monsters, the human being.
In the seminar, Russo goes through the filmmaking process and how you can plan, produce your low-budget film, and then distribute it, back in the days of straight-to-VHS film marketing. This seminar is truly impressive for independent filmmakers, and Russo comes off as a filmmaking guru to the adoring audience of wannabe filmmakers.
You know, once you have that much, probably any one of you, or all of you, could start, for instance, a scene between Martha and the cop, Vince Dawson. You know, right away we know there has to be a scene where they meet. Where are they going to meet? Probably after the caretaker's been killed, they're going to meet when she's called in to identify the body, right? So that's a scene.
In an interview titled John Russo on Midnight, the director talks about the disadvantages of working on a low budget. I was giving light-struck film to work with, but I always shoot a safety. So a lot of the time, I was lucky to be able to put a scene together because there was light flashes on all of the takes. I'd have to go with third or fourth choices in order to put the damn thing together. And through all that, it's still a pretty decent movie, made for not too much. The whole budget of Midnight was $71,000, shot with a crew of just 3 guys, including director John A Russo, camera and editor Paul McCulloch, and sound Eric Backer. At first, while watching Russo talk about the misgivings of the quality of Midnight, he seemed to me to be making a lot of excuses and blaming other people for the flaws in the film. For example, he blames audiences not knowing that the family from the end of the film are the kids who murder the trapped girl in the opening scenes, not because of storytelling techniques or narrative structure, but because the mummified corpse of the mother in the film's grotesque, psycho-like reveal was simply unrecognizable as the mother we saw with the children in the murder in the opening flashback. He blames makeup artist Tom Savini for that, as Russo says Savini went too far with the makeup, making the character unrecognizable. Apparently, when Russo showed the movie to Romero, when the guys were back on speaking terms, Romero asked Russo in the film's climax, "Who are these guys?" He also seemed a little sore that he had to change the ending at the request of the producers, adding in the heroic attempt by the molesting father to save his stepdaughter. This ending had to be tacked on to please financial backers. In the original novel, the father could have saved the daughter, but decides she could ruin his career if she ever talked about his attempted rape, and leaves her to die. A hell of a lot darker, but on a low budget, it's what the investors wanted. And Russo talks about producer interference always being a danger, even when low-budget films are working with independent investors. He also attributes the film's failing on its release, as the distributors held off on releasing the finished film for 2 whole years, as they wanted to wait until the slasher phase had worn down a bit, so the film wouldn't get lost in a sea of slasher competition. Little did they know, the slasher genre would keep going and going and going for a very long time. Even though Russo states he had all these obstacles to overcome, one line he said in that interview about Midnight really struck me, and made me realize that I had been totally wrong about thinking Russo was a cocksure director. Russo stated, "I had no support on that movie. Not really. But the way I am, I'll get it done if it kills me." It was after hearing this comment that I was reminded of a quote from world-renowned director William Friedkin, who said in conversation with Nicholas Winding Refn that the best advice I can give is, you must believe in yourself above all. And then it all clicked into place. Russo is not a big head in any way. He is not blaming others for his own lack of skill. He is using his experience in all aspects of low-budget filmmaking, such as writer, director, actor, and producer, to teach aspiring filmmakers like myself that what can go wrong will go wrong. But to hell with it. You must realize your vision no matter what the obstacles that stand in your way. There is always a way to make your film. You just have to persevere and go for it. Through reading his novel of Midnight and watching the movie again, it is clear that Russo is a bit of a control freak, as almost every line of dialogue is the same as the book. I think he believed in the story and his abilities as a filmmaker enough to say, why change it? This is a great story. Sure, there are things in the novel that didn't make the film purely because of budget, but the novel is full of great research into witchcraft and occult history. It also features a great backstory to the family's madness and some really interesting characters and congregation members that were cut from the film, but only because of budget reasons. Russo persevered and made this film of Midnight any way that he could. I'll get it done if it kills me.
They should have known better when they came into town. Every sign pointed to what could happen there. Every indication told them to leave now. The wise guys in the bar, the preacher's warning, and the sheriff who made hate a way of life. Go, get out of town.
Reading Midnight and Return of the Living Dead again, I realized Russo was also a pretty decent writer. He's not a master, but his books are damn right entertaining. Return, in particular, has such a dark backwoods feel, and his description of the morgues and the small-town rural attacks are really quite harrowing. In this respect, I must give Russo my complete admiration and thanks. So what if he goes around telling people that Night of the Living Dead was his story, and that without him, there would be no Living Dead series? He may very well be right.
What is it about zombies that just strike a chord with people?
When we made them flesh eaters, it did the trick.
Yeah.
And that, which was my idea.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was my idea that they would be dead people and after human flesh. George Romero did not come up with that. He didn't know who or what they were. And I rewrote his half of the screenplay and wrote the second half myself.
Which I mentioned because a lot of people think, what right does Russo have messing with this? I'm not messing with what?
Yeah.
If you didn't have those two ideas that they're dead people in search of human flesh, you don't have Night of the Living Dead. So
Russo has a first-hand experience to write books on how to make movies and talk about himself as a great independent filmmaker because he believes in himself. And that is the most important thing I have learned from doing this short film.
In writing 13 horror novels and writing, producing, or directing a half-dozen horror movies, I've had a lot of fun scaring people.
What I lack is belief in myself. And I say thanks to Russo for telling me to have that confidence. He may well be known as the less successful brother of the Pittsburgh film moguls, but by being part of Night of the Living Dead, one of the most revered independent films of all time, he has done something that a guy like me can only dream about. Midnight as a movie has its flaws for sure, but some of the horror moments, especially when Nancy is chased through the abandoned house after her companions are killed, an image from this scene became the movie's poster, is the real stuff of nightmares. The soundtrack and camera work are impressive, and give Midnight, in my opinion, its defining moment of horror, which is, as Russo put it, when he cited John Borman's masterful redneck chiller Deliverance as an influence, getting attacked by strangers is scary. So I end by saying thanks again to John A. Russo for his great contribution to books, film, screenwriting, and so much more. Go ahead and be the filmmaker you were born to be, and thanks for teaching me to have confidence in myself at the most important moments, when you have to get it done, even if it kills you.